Call the meeting to order. Do you want to do a roll call?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Chairman Mike Fan,
Here.
Vice Chair John Rocha is excused. Arnold Urias.
Here.
Nicole Kennedy.
Here.
Randy Goodman.
Here.
David Rowe.
Here.
And Anthony Teeters.
Here.
All right, thank you. First up is discussion and action items 3A, starting with our legal department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matthew Pedracki, the Deputy City Attorney. Having had the privilege of sitting back and watching a few of these meetings, I was curious as to how you were going to kind of evolve. And I noticed that you were really interested in getting your hands dirty, not just doing major policy. And having heard that, I wanted to do some training on open meeting law. And
Would you speak into the mic?
so I wanted to do some training on the open meeting law. And in the future, we're going to do some training on the conflict of interest statute and public records. And this is kind of basic law that everyone gets trained on. So the open meeting law is a state statute. Statutes are laws promulgated by the legislature. So these are rules from the Arizona legislature. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the open meeting law, often called sunshine laws. These are laws that allow for transparency and allow for the public to know what the business of the government is. Thank you. Oops, I don't want to go down yet. So the official public policy of the state of Arizona, acting through the legislature, is that official deliberations and proceedings must be conducted openly. And the reason for that is you want to maximize public access and participation in government. And any uncertainty will be resolved in favor of openness. Again, these are for transparency and allowing the public to know how the government is making decisions and spending their money. So we get into this concept of what is a meeting. And that's the kind of the crux of the open meeting law. And a meeting is a gathering in person or through technological devices of a quorum of the public body. So this body is how many people? Seven. So a quorum will be 4. It's half plus 1. So you have to have a quorum to have an official meeting to discuss, propose, deliberate, or take legal action. And the intent, again, is to have openness in government. And I went backwards again. So we're going to get this. I'm going down and down. So what do you do if you don't have a quorum? Occasionally, people will gather and only 3 of you show up. That's not a quorum. You need to have 4. So discussions and presentations should just be immediately rescheduled, and you should not discuss any of the items that are on the agenda. You just take that as a loss of a meeting, and you proceed to rescheduling it. Now, in Arizona, they have very specific notice and agenda requirements. You'll notice on your agenda today, the first discussion item is discussion of the open meeting laws. So that's what we're going to focus on, nothing else. In the future, I do want to talk to you about conflict of interest. So that will be another discussion item to discuss conflict of interest statute. For a notice and agenda and minute requirements in Arizona, the notice must inform when and where the public body will meet. So you'll always see on your agenda the location and time of your meetings. And the agendas must contain adequate information to inform the public of matters to be discussed or decided. We don't use topics like old business and new business because that really doesn't give the public an opportunity to understand what's being discussed. We need very specific items listed out, and you can't deviate from those. And we combine our notice and agenda together, as you can see from your agenda today. And minimally, you have to provide 24 hours of public notice. So the agenda must be available 24 hours before your meetings. There are exceptions. You can recess and resume a properly noticed meeting to a later date and time by making an announcement at the meeting and describing what agenda items will be covered. That's typically something that you see in Arizona. A lot of meetings start at 7 o'clock at night throughout the state for local cities and towns, and they'll go to midnight, and they just kind of run out of steam. They can't go further. You're not going to necessarily have to re-agendize that to have another meeting. And the other exception are actual emergencies. I can't imagine this particular committee having any particular emergencies that we're going to have to worry about where we cannot meet that 24-hour notice requirement. So what is a public body? You, as city officials, are members of a public body. This is an official committee, a standing committee of the city. I think they created it by resolution. And as such, you are now subject to all the laws that govern public officials. And this is one of them. But a public body is any entity, however designated, officially established on motion or order of the public body or presiding officer of a public body, whose members are appointed for a specific purpose of making a recommendation concerning a decision to be made or considered, or a course of conduct to be taken considered by the public body. And again, this is a standing committee. There are also special committees, advisory committees, subcommittees. You've got the Planning and Zoning Commission, you've got the Board of Adjustments, and certainly you have the City Council, which is sort of the ultimate governing body of the city. And what must a public body do to comply with the open meeting laws? You meet and take legal action and properly notice agendized meetings. The exception to that is something called an executive session. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go on. So what is an executive session? They are meetings where you can meet outside of the public's arena, but they're very specific and they need the approval of the city attorney. The 7 legal reasons you can go into an executive session. One is to discuss confidential personnel matters. Another is to discuss confidential information that is confidential as a matter of law. Where we typically meet in executive sessions, especially with the city councils, to provide legal advice to the city council and or to discuss settlement contracts or property negotiations. Who may attend executive sessions? Members of the public body. So if we ever call an executive session, which I'm not necessarily thinking is something we're going to have to do, but it's a possibility, you all can attend. And if it was something that involved a personnel decision, which isn't something this body's going to have to worry about, the person that they're talking about is can attend if that's something the public body wants. The Auditor General and individuals whose presence is reasonably necessary in order for the public to carry out its functions. So sometimes we'll have department heads in executive sessions to let us know what the status of certain things are. And what happens in executive session stays in executive session. The executive sessions are confidential as a matter of law, but you can't take any legal action in executive session. All votes must take place in public. And again, they are confidential as a matter of law. To the extent we ever find ourselves meeting, maybe you want to get some particular legal advice prior to making some determinations, we can do that. But again, when we come out of executive session, that's when you can make official votes and recommendations up to the city council. So what constitutes legal advice? Legal advice encompasses advice given to the public body regarding the ramifications of facts and laws as to a particular proposed action. And we threw in the city of Prescott versus the town of Chino Valley just because it's a local case that went up to the Supreme Court that generally stood for the proposition that you can only meet an executive session for certain enumerated reasons. And you cannot use an executive session to get around a particular law. You can't go into executive session to just chat or brainstorm. It has to be specific to either getting legal advice or discuss those 7 very specifically enumerated reasons that you can go into executive session. And how do we avoid pitfalls of the open meeting law? You don't poll each other on commission business. You don't call each other and say, hey, what are you thinking of voting on this? Or, hey, Bob's going to vote this way. What do you think? You limit your discussions with other members to the public meeting. All of your work should be done at a public meeting. You shouldn't necessarily be emailing each other. That tends to get you into a lot of trouble. And we'll go through some of the reasons why. But you have a staff liaison. Is that you, Chelsea? Amber and Chelsea. And you can use them to distribute information to each other without running afoul of the open meeting law. And we already discussed if there's no quorum, you just disband the meeting. Prohibited acts and violations, polling individual commission members to reach a decision prior to a meeting, or discussion and deliberation between less than a quorum for the purpose of circumventing the open meeting law. And we'll get into a couple examples of that in a minute. You cannot use any device to circumvent the law or splinter the quorum. We're going to talk about things like serial communications, polling, the hub and spoke example, and daisy chaining. Hub and spoke is you've got a hub in the middle of a car wheel with spokes. And let's say Chairman Fan is the hub, and he reaches out to Nicole Kennedy and says, I think we should vote on a particular item coming up a certain way. And that information comes back to the hub, Mike, and then Mike calls Randy Goodman, says, Randy, I just talked to Nicole about making a decision, and I think we should vote this way. And it comes back to Mike. Once you get 4 people talking about a potential legal action, even outside a meeting, you've got a open meeting law violation. And daisy chaining is, say Chairman Fan talks to Ms. Kennedy, then Ms. Kennedy talks to Mr. Goodman, and Mr. Goodman talks to Mr. Rowe. There's 4 people talking about proposed legal action outside of an agendized meeting. That's a violation of the open meeting law. So we just want you to be aware that the open meeting law is something that the Attorney General takes seriously and the City Council takes seriously. And we kind of want to give you sort of the best advice and training as we can so you don't violate that particular law. So here are some examples of prohibited two-way communications. You shouldn't be discussing, deliberating, taking legal action back and forth among the quorum on matters that could foreseeably come before the board or board business. And the Attorney General puts out a really helpful handbook on the open meeting law, and it's online and anyone can find it, and it's quite helpful if you ever kind of want to do any of your own research on it. But it kind of has this section that talks about all discussions, deliberations, considerations, or consultations among a majority of the members of a public body regarding matters that may foreseeably require a final action or final decision by the governing body constitute legal action, and therefore must be conducted in a public meeting or an executive session in accordance with the open meeting law. The safest course of action is to assume the open meeting law applies whenever a majority of the body discusses the business of the public body. And there can also be prohibited one-way communications where, let's say, one of you proposes a legal action. Propose means to put forward consideration, discussion, or adoption of an issue. And it takes only one person to propose a legal action. And you're not supposed to be proposing legal action outside a notice meeting. So again, all your work should be done at the meetings. If an electronic communication for one member of the public body proposes a legal action and sent to enough members, so again, you got a quorum of 4, you've got a violation again. So it doesn't matter if you're talking to each other, texting each other, emailing each other, a communication is a communication. So just be careful how you kind of engage with each other outside of a meeting. So some examples. Let's say somebody emails somebody and says, Counsel, person Smith was admitted to the hospital last night. Well, that clearly does not propose a legal action. But what about we should install a crosswalk at First Domain? Well, that does propose legal action. And it should be agendized for a regular meeting, and there should be a discussion of the full committee. Another example, here's a recipe for lemon bars, right? Not a problem. But I hope I can count on all of you to vote in favor of agenda item number 5, problem. Serial communications may violate the open meeting law. Verbal serial communications going from one person to the next, sharing communications among a quorum again. is prohibited. Nonverbal letters can violate the open meeting law. If a series of letters from one member to the next would violate, if they're kind of shared amongst four of you, or 4 letters go out. Emails is really where we see a lot of people get tripped up, because it's just a convenient way to communicate, and it seems to be the way everyone's sort of communicating these days. And they can even occur at different times and still constitute a violation of the open meeting law. You don't need a simultaneous email. You can email somebody and 3 weeks later, somebody emails back, and then the emails, and suddenly 4 people are talking outside of a duly noticed meeting. That's a problem. You cannot use the email system to circumvent the open meeting law. Cannot use email among a quorum to propose legal action, again, discuss legal action, deliberate on legal action, or take legal action. Emails and other communications, again, email communications can easily constitute a meeting. The use of email among a quorum, again, 4 of you, of the members to discuss public matters is prohibited. Emails regarding commission business are public record. So it doesn't matter if you're using your cell phone to text somebody, that particular text, if it proposes a legal action, is a public record. And we'll have a training on that in a future date on the public records law. And your staff liaison isn't supposed to communicate the positions of various other commissioners. So you can't use your staff liaison to kind of circumvent the open meeting law either. Email communications are treated the same as any other communication between board members. And again, if you get to that point where you're exchanging to a quorum that involves proposing a legal action or discussion or deliberation, that could constitute a violation of the open meeting law. There's no distinction between discussing facts versus opinions among the quorum. Again, the actual statutory definition of deliberation is a collective acquisition and exchange of facts preliminary to a final decision. Therefore, two-way communication or discussion of facts among quorum regarding potential board business could be a violation. Staff email. So we do encourage you to use your staff liaisons if you think information needs to be sent to the other board members. Passive receipt of information from staff without more does not violate the open meeting law, like sending out your board packets and your agendas. Staff may not send opinions or substantive communications about board business from a board member to enough of the other board members to constitute a quorum. So we just ask that you be careful and use your staff to communicate to each other. And, you know, we'll talk a little bit about internet and social networking. Like email, this is a type of communication that does not have to occur among a quorum of members simultaneously to be considered a meeting. Like email, this type of communication can occur on a personal computer, smartphone, and still be board business. So when you're on Instagram or Facebook and you're posting things, just be careful. This internet social networking could be considered a virtual meeting, and if so, would require notice and access. Arizona does allow for the use of technological devices to get you to a quorum. So sometimes the council member can't be at a meeting physically, but they can call in, and they'll be considered as an attendee and part of the quorum. Type of communication results in the creation of electronic public records, again, which must be maintained and preserved, and that's going to be another training. But just assume everything you put down in writing anywhere is going to be part of the public record if it involves this committee. You can't direct staff to violate the open meeting law. Sanctions will be imposed if someone knowingly aids, agrees, or attempts to aid another person in violating this article. The violations for the penalties for violating the open meeting law are generally civil penalties, which accrue from the $500 range to the $2,500 range, and a potential loss of your office if you become a habitual abuser. The Attorney General will come in and file a lawsuit against you. This is just meeting etiquette now, kind of things that, you know, you shouldn't do because a lot of times they kind of erode the public trust. So, you know, you don't want to be passing notes to each other during a meeting. You don't want to whisper to each other during a meeting. You don't want to use your own cell phone to text somebody at the dais. And a quorum talking to individuals before the meeting officially starts could be a problem. And even if you're not talking about board business, when people see four of you kind of chatting amongst yourselves, they get a little concerned. There are certain social events you may be invited to, and a majority of you may attend, and that's okay. Typically, our city clerk will file something called a courtesy agenda, just to let you know that a majority of this particular committee might be attending some sort of social event, but no legal action can be taken. Not sure this is going to be particularly relevant to you, but public forums, speeches, and community events. So if a quorum might be present when one or more council members plan on speaking or discussing, so council members, you could just substitute committee members, city business with those in attendance, we will issue a special agenda meeting notice, and the agenda will contain a description of the general topics to be discussed and an indication that no action will be taken. But the general advice we give is to have the staff liaisons or whoever's creating the agendas share it with the city attorney's office, and we'll review it for accuracy. Communications with the media. The open meeting law does not prohibit a member of a public body from speaking to the media regarding matters that may come before the public body. That's kind of your First Amendment right in a lot of ways. And an open meeting law, it does not prohibit a member of the public body from voicing an opinion or discussing an issue with the public, either at a venue other than a public meeting or body. You're allowed to have personal opinions. What are the public rights to come to your meetings? The public does have a right to attend the meetings, to listen to the meetings, to tape record the meetings, to videotape the meetings. The public does not necessarily have a right to speak unless the chairman wants to take public comment, unless it's an official public hearing, which is not something you all will be doing. A public body cannot require attendees to identify themselves and sign in unless they're making a presentation before the council. Public has no right to speak again or disrupt the meeting. And when in doubt, we resolve questionable issues in favor of openness. And if there's a violation of the open meeting law, a lot of the things that were passed will be nullified and voided. So that is the basics on open meeting law. I just wanted to kind of get that information to you all. I think in the future, I do want to talk to you about conflict of interest statute and the public record statute, but we knew your time is limited, so we wanted to break them out a little bit. But if you have any particular questions on this subject, let me know. Yep.
Microphone, please, sir. For the record.
Specific to the social media element there, as an example, if we as a quorum maybe wanted to survey the public on, reasonable rents to get a better feel for what we're targeting, if we were to do that via social media, would that be considered a meeting if we were surveying via electronic outlets such as social media?
No, you can do that. And my recommendation would be, and this will just kind of come around organically, is you're going to advise your staff liaisons that we would like to do a questionnaire to the public, and we'd like to get it out to as many media sources as possible and have the information come back. But as long as it doesn't involve four of you making a decision, you'll be fine.
Thank you.
Yep.
My question is, if we were to want to share educational materials, for example, I came across a national study on housing that I found relevant to our committee. Could I send that to Chelsea and Chairman Van? Okay.
That would be the preferred way you do that. So Chelsea, I've come across an article that I think would be relevant, and can you possibly share it? And she'll shoot it out to everyone. You will not have violated the open meeting law. What we would tell Chelsea to do is not opine on it or let anyone know what your thoughts are on it, but just sharing information through your staff liaison is appropriate.
Thank you.
Some of the proposals I've been working on require me talking to staff at city. Is there any limitations on talking to them about the things I need and the information I need?
No, you individually can talk to staff members.
Okay.
Where it becomes a problem is when you go back to, let's say, Nicole saying, I talked to staff member X, and they feel this, and we should do that, and then Nicole gives that information to Mike Fan, and then Mike Fan calls Mr. Urias, and you have 4 people proposing legal action or discussing a deliberation. That should be done in the open meeting law. But you do have the right, certainly, to access information from the staff.
Okay.
Anyone else? In other words, it's as difficult as can be to get anything done, is what you're saying, actually do stuff.
Correct.
So if there is a member, I mean, right now, I'm meeting with Chelsea to work through the agenda, preparing for the next meeting. If Randy has an item that he wants to discuss, and since we can only discuss what's on the agenda, he doesn't come to me. He goes directly to Chelsea and asks it to be also put on the agenda.
I think he can go to you as long as you're not hitting a quorum, right? I think the way you handle that is on the regular agenda in the future, we'll have discussion of items you would like to consider at a future agenda. And then, so you're at a regular meeting, and then she can, Chelsea or Amber can just say, all right, they want to talk about that, that, and that. We'll add that, that, and that.
Right.
And the possibility for them to add after a meeting is conducted, the ability for a member to, hey, I thought of this after the meeting, email Mike or.
Now, I think the easiest way to do it is email Chelsea or Amber, and they'll share the information with Mike.
Okay.
This way you don't subject yourself to the potential of other people on the committee answering you. I think that's the safest way to do it.
Okay. So I would encourage every member. I'm anxious to get things done, and that means a collective effort. And since we're limited to discuss only things that are on the agenda, if you have something to bring forward, get with Chelsea or get with me, and we'll get it on the agenda so we can.
Mike, can I offer something else I wanted to ask Matt?
Yes.
If you have a subject, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, that requires a lot of discussion, I think we can have a study session on one particular item.
Sure.
If it's something you want to present,
Okay.
then we'll just call it as a study session, and we can discuss it openly.
Okay.
Because sometimes, it's not easy just to get it out in a
Right.
quick agenda item.
Okay,
But
thank
if
you.
it takes, maybe explanation or whatever, I think there's a way to do it through a study session.
Right, and the study session is set up for kind of a long-term, heavy discussion that may take hours. But what you cannot do at a study session is come to a final vote. So they're really there to just study an issue, and then something will be placed on a future agenda for you to vote on it.
And then finally, if I have an agenda item that I think is borderline, or I believe is a subject of an executive session, just come to Chelsea and
You come directly to the city attorney's
or
office.
to you
Yeah.
and say, I'd like to discuss this, but I think it's sensitive. It's probably
Right.
a subject of an executive session.
Yeah.
You can advise
Yes.
appropriately.
And then we'll get with your liaison if it's appropriate and
Good.
set up the appropriate notice and agenda.
Okay. Anyone
There
else?
you go. So that's the fun of government, right? It's designed to move slowly to protect individual liberties and rights and the public's access to information. And it is different from the private sector where it gets stuff done. So it can be frustrating at times.
Yeah.
But there's a reason.
It already is.
I know. Which is why I wanted to give the training.
Okay, anybody else on that issue? Let's move to item 3B. If everybody's read the minutes, if there's no corrections to be made, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion. Nicole?
Second, moved by Nicole and seconded by David. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Item 3C, presentation and discussion from Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona.
Yes, sir. We have a PowerPoint presentation, and we have Ms. Devonna McLaughlin here to present to us. And you can sit or stand, however. Sitting is good? Okay. Let's get that anchored there for you.
Yay.
Speak into the mic if you would, please.
I will. I have some things for you guys, if it's
I can
okay.
pass those out
Okay.
for you.
All right. So I think I counted right. That's the presentation. And then these are packets of handouts. I'm going to steal one actually, so I know what I'm referencing to you guys.
There you go.
Okay. There you go. That way when I talk about it, I know what I'm giving you. Eek.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yay. Thank you for letting me come chat with you guys this morning. My name is Devonna McLaughlin, and I serve as the CEO of Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona. I have given you a couple of things, so I just want to tell you what you have. First, it's just the presentation that'll be up there in front of you in case you like it hard copy or want to take notes. I know I have vision issues, so sometimes I'm trying to like read really small print quickly before a slide moves, and then that doesn't work for me. So you have that. And then I've also given you copies of handouts that I'll reference when I'm chatting with you guys, but it's information packets about existing down payment assistance programs that we work with other municipalities to administer. So examples of some of the outreach and marketing and program design for programs that are available in other communities in Northern Arizona. So we'll get to that, but I just wanted you to kind of know what you had in front of you. So, yes, thank you. So I'm Devonna. Ooh, and I talk with my hands. I will not hit that again, I promise. So I will try not to be too, I won't hit you, I promise.
I got tape ready.
Yeah, I know. Radio is much better than TV because I have to sit on my hands. The clicker, is there a, oh, no, you're good. Okay, perfect. All right, yay. So housing affordability is an issue across Northern Arizona, certainly across the state and the nation. It's become more on the radar for folks, not just an issue for folks who are low income, who are experiencing homelessness, who are on fixed incomes, although those populations probably see a greater impact than others. But we recognize that housing affordability or unaffordability has impacted our workforce pretty significantly in Flagstaff, in Sedona, in Cottonwood, and then down here in Prescott as well. This slide is for Flagstaff, but I think what you'll see is that it's reminiscent of what other communities have experienced as well, maybe not to the same extent, but we've seen pretty significant increases in fair market rent and sales prices over the last decade. And we've seen some corresponding increases in income, but not to the same level. So income increases are not keeping up with housing increases. And when housing is the biggest percentage of a household budget on a monthly basis, when that's out of whack, it really impacts what's left over for households to spend on childcare and food and healthcare and transportation and all those other things. And so that's kind of what we've seen, especially in Flagstaff, but we recognize it's happening across the country and the state. So just merely an interesting representation of the reality that we're seeing. So our organization, just to give you a quick history, we were founded in 1990. We did the math 33 years ago. The Affordable Housing Coalition is what we were founded as, and we changed our name along the way to Both Hands, so you might have heard us referenced as that organization. And then in 2014, we changed our name to Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona. Same organization. We've done similar programs over that 33-year history, but we've kind of evolved not to just only focus on Flagstaff, although we have historically been Flagstaff-centric, but our geographic service area is Coconino, Yavapai, and Mojave counties. Our mission is to build opportunity for sustainable, affordable housing in northern Arizona, and our vision is that residents will have access to safe, decent, and affordable housing with an opportunity for upward mobility. All right. So today I was going to talk to you about 3 topics. 2 are related to homeownership, and then 1 is related to rentals, focusing on housing opportunities and challenges for your workforce. And so the first topic is down payment and closing cost assistance. The second one is land trust and deed restrictions, and then how to get more rental units through adaptive reuse, hotel conversions, et cetera. So we have been administering in partnership with the City of Flagstaff a down payment assistance program that we refer to as CHAP since 1999. So that's a really long time. CHAP stands for the Community Homebuyer Assistance Program. You'll find that all of our programs have some kind of acronym associated with them, so I apologize for that because we just like to do that. So CHAP has evolved over time. I will tell you the way it looks now is not how it looked in the past. We've had different contracts with the city, different negotiations based on what income levels we're serving, what assistance amounts people can get to buy a home, if things are repaid or forgiven. Just different conversations over time because it's been 24 years of a program. And I will tell you that's one of the great things about this program is that it's not a federally funded, federally designated, federally defined program. The City of Flagstaff has spent general fund dollars on down payment and closing cost assistance to help the workforce, recognizing that that definition of low income from the federal government of 80% AMI is not the right definition for who needs help in their community. That the need for affordable housing was above 80% AMI, and that your workforce often is above that federal definition. And so that's been the really great thing, is that because there's local money put towards the problem, there's local control and local decision-making about program design, who's going to be helped, how it's going to be, how the program will be is it 15,000 or 20,000? Is it a loan? Is it a grant? Is it a combination of the two? All of those things. And so that's been a lovely partnership because we can talk to them about what we're seeing from client utilization and client use and client need. And then they can come in and say, regulatorily, we can do this, or council can approve this, or however it might work out. The reason we're doing down payment assistance, so I do want to, I'm going to give you an overview of quite a few different programs, and they're all slightly different, but I want to talk to you a little bit about why. In Flagstaff, the Economic Collaborative of Northern Arizona did a workforce employee housing survey. And it's aged at this point, it's about 5 years old. But when they surveyed thousands of employees at our 10 largest employers on housing, they had the biggest response they've ever seen. So it was relevant to the people being surveyed. And the data cemented that housing is a need for the workforce. So you can get this survey or a report online, or I can email it to you too if you want to see it, because it's multiple pages long. But the capture, the bold print, it says that the survey showed a strong concern weighted towards homeownership opportunities, with 82.7% of respondents rating homeownership as very important, and 86.4% of respondents citing the price of housing as the biggest obstacle to ownership.
Can I interrupt for
Yeah.
just a second? Just so we have some ground rules here, would you like us to ask questions as we go while it's fresh, or do you want us to hold any questions until the end?
I am fine with interruption.
Okay.
Yeah, so did you have a
Interrupt?
question? Yeah, if you want.
No, I just wanted to, if anybody else, I do have I'm going to wait till,
Okay.
because I think you're going to get to my questions already, and if you don't, then I'll interrupt at this point.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to let everybody else know, if you've got a question, jump in.
See, and then I'm pausing to just see if anyone's like ready to jump in. So yes, happy to have a robust, casual conversation. That's kind of how I work anyway. So thank you for that. The study also reflected that 54.6% of respondents were considering leaving Flagstaff due to housing costs. And that's your workforce. And so I go to a lot of meetings. I keep getting invited to them. It's lovely. Economic development meetings, political meetings, different topics, and housing always comes up. And I am not the one bringing it up. Like, I'm the housing person in the room, and people kind of then look at me. But I don't have to bring it up because it is a pervasive need in Northern Arizona. The data shows it. Anecdotally, we see it. We recognize that there's workforce recruitment and retention issues that have to do with all sorts of things, trailing spouses, inflation, your workforce reductions with folks retiring. But a lot of it also has to do with housing costs in our communities up in Northern Arizona. And I would imagine that it's exacerbating an already challenging situation for employers. So it was nice to have the data. It was nice to have the employers on board to say that housing is a concern for our employees. So in focusing on home ownership, we've been doing it much longer than the survey, but we recognize that down payment and closing cost assistance is an effective tool on the demand side of the problem. So this will focus on that issue, and then the other topic of deed restriction and land trust will focus on supply side. So I just say that out loud. So I do want to let you know that since 1999, Housing Solutions has administered through multiple funding sources, $7.58 million of down payment closing cost assistance benefiting 434 households. We've leveraged $2.97 million in buyer contributions and $64 million in first mortgage financing. So this is not a handout. This is a hand up. All the programs that we administer are loans, except one new one, which we didn't control. And so they're repaid or they're forgiven over an ownership period. They're structured a little differently, but it is a loan program. And so that helps get to that purchase price of X amount of dollars, but they're leveraging first mortgage financing, their own buyer contribution. Even if we gave someone $15,000 or $40,000 in assistance, that's not enough to buy a house. So down payment and closing cost assistance programs really benefit mortgage-ready, credit-worthy households with income. And so it might be, most folks are employed and have income from workforce. Some might be retired and have retirement income or fixed income, but for the most part, we're seeing that they're employed in our communities. So CHAP, the City of Flagstaff's program right now is $15,000. It's limited to folks at 125% of the area median income who are first-time Flagstaff homebuyers. So it's a matching program. Homebuyers have to contribute $5,000 of their funds in order to get a 3-to-1 match of up to $15,000. And it is a loan. So there is a deed of trust that's recorded on the property behind the first mortgage. There's a promissory note. There's owner occupancy requirements. The loan is never forgiven. Some programs forgive over time. Everyone thinks they got in that program. But this loan is never forgiven. It is always repaid. And it is repaid when there is a trigger. So when the owner of the property decides to sell their property, it would be repaid. If they decide to no longer own or occupy the property, it would be repaid. And owner occupancy is verified annually by the City of Flagstaff Housing Section. And then the third reason it would be repaid is if somebody wanted to do a cash out refinance. So if they want to access the equity in their home, then they'd have to pay back the city first. And the city is the beneficiary on the note and the deed. Housing Solutions determines eligibility. We do the housing counseling. We make sure that the client meets program guidelines, that the loan meets the program guidelines, and it's a fixed rate, and the housing ratio is not too high, and all of those things. We do the legal documents, we fund the assistance to the title company, and then we get reimbursed by the City of Flagstaff. Yeah.
So CHAP is the beneficiary up to the loan amount, or CHAP is the beneficiary?
So the City of Flagstaff is the beneficiary on the note and deed for CHAP.
Just for the amount borrowed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And then repayment always happens, right, when one of those three things happens. But the city of Flagstaff has actually changed repayment guidelines to follow.
Now, wait a minute. So
Oh, yeah.
it's a second deed of trust, not a first deed of trust. And so repayment always happens when there's money available. I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah, fair point.
Especially in 2008, 2009, a lot of those loans weren't paid when a mortgage was upside down.
So actually,
Fair?
yeah, so the potential is there. You're absolutely right. So repayment would come out of proceeds of sale or equity in the home. They're not going after a deficiency balance from the borrower if they are upside down. However, even with the Great Recession, the foreclosure rate was about 2% on these loans, which is well below federal national standards, especially during that time. And the vast majority were still paid off even in foreclosure because there was enough equity at the, so you could sell at the courthouse right through an auction. And so there was enough equity from the sales price at the auction to pay off the second as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. But you're right, it is a benefit to the borrower to have that cushion, right? That they're not going to go after a deficiency balance and impact your credit if there isn't equity in the home. So there is that. So it's a little bit of a risk. The city has offset that risk, though. So what they've done is they've seen one of the changes over time has been the repayment structure. So at the beginning, it was you borrow $15,000, you repay $15,000. Pretty simple. And then we've seen home prices appreciate through the roof, right? 166% appreciation. And now that $15,000 can't help the same income borrower buy the same kind of house. And it's kind of like, oh, crud. So what they've done is they've said repayment will be based on an equity share model. The easiest way I have to explain this is an example. So let's say you bought a $100,000 house, which I know doesn't exist, but it's easy math. And you got $10,000 of CHAP assistance to buy your $100,000 house. That's 10% of the purchase price. When you sell your house, you're going to pay back 10% of the sales price or the appraised value at repayment. So if the home appreciates, which a lot of them have done, and now you're going to sell it for $150,000, you're going to repay 10% of the $150,000, so you're paying back $15,000 instead of the $10,000 you borrowed. In that scenario, the borrower still gets $45,000 of appreciation that they were able to access because they bought a house with assistance when they bought the house, and they couldn't have bought the house without assistance. So it doesn't harm the buyer. It shares the appreciation over the ownership period until the loan is repaid. I'm going to pause there to make sure I explain that clearly for folks because I recognize like random numbers thrown out. You're like, what? But that helps offset some of those losses too, if they can share in the appreciation during the ownership period. And we see very little pushback from borrowers or clients when we explain that. They're like, oh, okay, I get it, right? It's kind of that pay it forward mentality of it's no interest, no payment, but if the home increases in value, I'm going to pay back the same percentage, but I still made 90%. Okay, we're good. So that is how they've designed their program to help capture some of that appreciation benefit back to the city. About 8 years ago, the city of Flagstaff also started looking at its own employee recruitment and retention. And they looked specifically at the police department and dispatch because they were having trouble recruiting and retaining police officers and dispatch personnel. And those positions are hard to recruit and expensive to train. And then when we've trained them and spent $100,000 putting an officer through an academy and on probation and all the things, and then they transfer to Phoenix because they can make more money and cost of living's lower, that's kind of a problem. So they started an employer-assisted housing program for PD and dispatch. It started at $7,000 per employee. They've increased it to $10,000. And it is a one-to-one match of the home buyer puts in up to $10,000, they'll get it matched with up to $10,000 of assistance. This also is a loan. So once again, recorded deed of trust, promissory note, but this one is really an HR recruitment retention benefit. So it's forgiven on a prorated basis over 10 years of employment with the city. They also recognize that other areas of the city might also have recruitment and retention issues, so they expanded it to all full-time employees of the city of Flagstaff. We've helped 31 Flagstaff employee households purchase a home through this program since it started 8 years ago. I will tell you for Flagstaff right now, they've been our longest partner, and they're amazing. Right now, we're working to try and get them to change some of these program guidelines. So we have seen increases in prices and interest rates and buying power, like reduction then in buying power. And so we're advocating now to City Council to increase the amounts of assistance per household. We're advocating for $40,000 in the first program, the CHAP program, that benefits up to 125% area median income, and $20,000 in employer-assisted housing assistance.
And is the city of Flagstaff funding all of this out of city funds?
Right now and historically, yes. I will tell you too, it's the last slide, but I'll give you that information. So the city voters passed a housing bond in November of $7 million, and 3 million of that, I might be wrong, it might be 4 million. Anyway, a percentage of that, a good chunk of it, is to expand down payment and closing cost assistance programs. So I believe moving forward, they'll take it out of bond money and not necessarily a general fund allocation because the voters have approved that.
Okay.
The other nice thing about most of these programs too is that when people sell or refinance or no longer occupy, money comes back into the pool and then could be re-lent out. So there is a general fund allocation, but there's also program proceeds that help fund the pot of money that's available. So that's kind of a nice feature.
So, sorry.
No, go for it.
So who funds your organization?
So we are under contract with the city to do the eligibility determination, housing counseling, and loan administration, and it is a contract basis. So that also comes out of general fund dollars.
And also other communities or just Flagstaff?
No, other communities are now doing it too, which is lovely.
Okay.
Yeah. So then, in addition to city programs that we've had for the longest period of time, we've given you a list of all the other agencies, municipalities, groups that we work with. The first one and the last one are funded by the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. So they're mandated by Congress to reinvest 10% of their profits annually. And San Francisco Federal Home Loan Bank covers California, Nevada, and Arizona. And they have a WISH program, which provides up to $22,000. It just changed, $22,000 in assistance to low-income first-time home buyers. So this is your federal definition, again, of low income under 80% AMI. I will tell you, we struggle to get buyers in that income range who can afford a home. And we are much more likely to help folks outside of Flagstaff with this program than inside of Flagstaff. Or it's a layer or a leverage. So the nice thing too about some of our programs is that we can layer them. So you might get like the City of Flagstaff's CHAP program plus WISH assistance to buy a deed restricted home, for example. So we can throw some more programs and some more resources at households if they qualify for multiple programs. The Middle Income Down Payment Assistance Program is a pilot program from the Federal Home Loan Bank for high cost areas, and our bank partner, Alliance Bank, has limited it to Coconino County, but it helps higher income households up to 120% AMI, and it's up to $40,000. So other funders are starting to see more money per household needs to be available. We have partnered with Sedona and Cottonwood too, and those are the handouts I've given you. So there's 4 programs between those 2 communities. And the reason there's 4 is because each community has done a community program for workers who work within the city of Sedona or work within the city of Cottonwood. There's income guidelines for that one. And then they can buy anywhere in Verde Valley. That's up to $40,000 per household. And then each of those cities has done an employer-assisted housing program for their employees without income limits. It also provides up to $40,000 worth of assistance.
Did they determine eligibility?
Sorry.
Did they determine the eligibility of Verde Valley as eligibility based on a reasonable commute? That is a retention factor?
Yeah, so in Flagstaff, they limited where you buy to City of Flagstaff to create that benefit. In Cottonwood and Sedona, they limited it to employees within, and then recognizing that Sedona has a housing issue that even if you gave a police officer $40,000, there's not a house in Sedona they could buy. So they looked at where are their current employees commuting from, and it is that Verde Valley region. So they helped us come up with zip codes. And so we, generally speaking, say Verde Valley, and people kind of get what that means, and then it's specific to zip code. So it includes unincorporated areas around there, Camp Verde, Rimrock, Cottonwood, Cornville, all of those kinds of areas.
And the bank partners that you previously mentioned, is that through Community Reinvestment Act that they're required to participate with funds, or are they just utilizing the funds that are made possible from grants, donations, et cetera?
It's a little bit of both. So for the WISH program and the Middle Income Down Payment Assistance through the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, the bank partners we work with have to be members of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. Not all banks are, because their corporate offices might be in Chicago, so they might be a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago instead of San Francisco. So we limit the number of banks that will play with that program because of where they belong. There's 9 federal home loan banks across the country. We need them to play with San Francisco. So that limits folks. And then do they want to access those funds and administer them? That's a cost that the bank would have to bear. So we've been fortunate that Alliance Bank, Western Alliance Bank, and Alliance Bank of Arizona have been members of Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco and are willing to administer those funds in partnership with our agency. We've also heard from some smaller credit unions that are members of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco that are willing to play as well. We can't go to Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco directly. It has to go through that member bank partner, just to make things complicated.
Let me go back for just a second.
Yeah.
Do you know what the median income is in Flagstaff?
I do. So let me quickly calculate, because I have 125%, not 100%, but I can figure that out backwards. Divided by 125 times 100, 73,600 for a household of 1. Would you like a household of 3 or a household of 4 or both? I'm sorry, is it like 2.7 is our average household size in Flagstaff? I don't know what your all's is.
Yeah, Chelsea, do we have any idea what ours is?
You want 2?
2.1, 2.2.
Okay, so if we look at, times 100 divided by 125. For a household of 2, it's 84,100 in Flagstaff. And I did not calculate AMI for Prescott MSA, I'm sorry, before I came down. So your alls would be different.
84,000 what?
100.
Do we know ours, Chelsea, here in Prescott?
Not off the top of my head now.
Okay.
It's out there, though. Not off the top of my head either, but it's out there.
I can multitask. So a lot of the programs are based on a percentage of AMI broken down by household size, because HUD will give you a household of 1, 2, 3, and 4 for 50%, and then you can calculate if you want to hit 100% or 125% or 150%, depending on the political will and the need in the community. Did you have a follow-up question for me on AMI?
That's good.
Yeah, can I ask you real quick too?
Yeah.
You've mentioned that you've partnered with some other municipalities. Does your organization ever partner with a private industry, large private company?
Oh, thank you for that question. That's a great question. Sorry, I found Yavapai County. Hang on. So we actually, after the Acona survey came out, and now all these employers know they have a workforce housing need, we advocated strongly for them to look at employer-assisted housing programs for their employees. And I will tell you, the ones that stepped up were public sector, not private. So when you look at the city of Flagstaff, Coconino County did one for their law enforcement personnel as well. We are open to working with employers to administer, establish, create, advise on an employer-assisted housing program. We just haven't seen that will yet. And so what we've done instead, I've been banging that drum for years now, and we actually started looking at, we focused on larger employers. That makes sense. And then we kind of had an aha moment. So 3 years ago, we took the idea of an employer-assisted housing program to our board of directors. We have 18 employees. a few, 16 employees. And so we said, gosh, if larger employers could do this, smaller ones can too. And maybe as a housing organization, we should walk that walk. And so our board of directors said yes. They created a employer-assisted housing program for our employees, which you're like, okay, great. You have 16 people, and like how many people already own a home and are eligible? We had 3 employees use it in the first 6 months. And it was a tremendous, not just benefit to those 3, although yes, but it was so funny because we started designing this program and we had all the same things, right? Is this enough money? Who would even use it? Housing prices are through the roof. Nobody's ever going to buy. And we're like, well, let's create it and see. And as soon as it was a possibility, like it was scheduled to go to our board for consideration, all of a sudden I have employees who are like, I'm under contract and I could really use the help. And I was like, well, okay, let's hope they pass it. And then we can really quick work with your lender. So we're working with a small accounting company to do an employer-assisted housing program for her 20 employees. So very small employer-assisted housing programs on the private sector, but we are certainly open to that, especially because to me, if there is a community program that could be leveraged with an employer-funded program, now you have more bang for your buck, right? Like if you can be telling your employees that you can get this assistance from the city of Cottonwood, and oh, by the way, we'll also provide, a grant or a loan to you as an employer-assisted housing benefit, maybe now you get $50,000 or $60,000, not $40,000. And it makes it more likely that you can compete in the market. So I think there needs to be more people with solutions at the table. And so I always advocate for that.
Have you had any background experience with any of the large employers, such as a hospital?
Yeah, we've talked to them. Well, if you're talking about Northern Arizona Healthcare, I don't know which hospital is down here. I'm sorry.
Well, we have Dignity here, and I know Dignity was a high need for that area in particular. So when you're...
Yay. Oh, I love Dignity Health. You did financing for us for a project. Thank you. Okay, so not Dignity. We were focused on Northern Arizona Healthcare because they have locations in Flagstaff and Cottonwood. So that's where we started. And it hasn't come to fruition yet.
What is the average time, and I'm sorry, but what is the average turnaround time? So could somebody come in and say, I found a house, and they can make an offer, and how quickly can you act? I mean, how many lose the houses because it takes, how government is?
Oh, not many at all.
Okay, good.
So, I mean, we would ask for a 45-day close. If you come in and you're under contract and we've got 30, that would be amazing. If you called me and said, I'm closing tomorrow, and my lender suddenly said I have a gap, we'd have a problem. I couldn't move that fast. But typically, if you're getting mortgage financing, they're doing some things, right? Like you're having your inspection, your appraisal. It has to go to underwriting for final. We work with lenders on an ongoing basis to fit into their program or their timeline. The longest part of the process typically is when the reverse happens. Someone comes to us, they're interested in buying a house sometime. They may not be ready now. They may have a lease for the next 6 months, right? They're not going to break it. They might have terrible credit. They might have no savings. Every program we have has a buyer contribution. So if you've got no money, I can't help you with a match because there's nothing to match. So then we would focus on creating a plan to help you overcome those barriers. We can pull credit, get a tri-merge credit report. We can help you improve your credit to be mortgage ready. That takes time. So some folks are with us for a while working on those things. But if you're ready and you come to us, we can move pretty quickly.
Thank you. That's a great service to have.
Yeah. And the nice thing too is oftentimes we'll fund the assistance and then seek reimbursement. So I'm not waiting on like a resolution from council or a city manager has to be in town and then the attorney has to sign. I mean, I know government processes, but typically we don't have to work on those for just funding and assistance, and then we'll get reimbursement through a contract afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, lots of programs, lots of designs, lots of ways of doing it, lots of ways of kind of making the programs work to meet the needs of the funders, quite frankly. I did. Yay. Sorry, it might require some math though, because they don't give you. So the median family income for Prescott for a household of 4 is $76,700. If you want for a smaller household, we'll have to double it. So for a household of 2, it would be $60,400 is 100% AMI. $400 for a household of 2. Yeah. Yeah. So I will tell you, down payment assistance programs are awesome. They're amazing. We've seen a lot of impact. I want to be honest about the challenges, because no solution is the solution for everyone or every problem. This is a demand side solution. So we are helping buyers be more competitive in the market. We do not control the market. And so that's where we run into problems, right? So if there are sales prices that have escalated because you have competition from outside buyers or second home buyers or investors, or no product being created, right? There's no supply being constructed. Like, that could all impact availability of homes to purchase. Who else is trying to buy the same house, right? So for a while we had like 15 offers on one house in Flagstaff, and the cash buyer got picked like 9 times out of 10. So we don't control that. And then we also don't control interest rates. So as much as $40,000 helps folks with buying power, when rates went from 3.5% to 7.375, the buying power of that amount of money that people could have already spent was decreased, so they can afford less mortgage, they can afford less home. And it's a bummer, because it really is the biggest impact. And so we are stuck working in that environment. So we've seen that we helped, 3 years ago, we helped 12 families. Last year, we helped 5. Because there's just, all of these things are really happening. And so I say that out loud. But I would also say that chasing the market is not the right thing, right? Like, we've heard from folks like, why even do a program because of this environment? This will not always be the environment. Been in this work for 19 years, went through a foreclosure crisis. That stunk. Like, that felt terrible, like the world was ending. And then we come out of it, and now there's homes that are decently priced. Interest rates were great. It was the boom years of first-time home buyers, helped lots of families. So it just really does cycle through. And if you're constantly saying, well, it's not the right time, then it will not be the right time. But it is the right time for somebody. People buy a home when they want to put down roots, when they have good, stable income, when they've saved their money, when they're ready. Not when we think they're ready. So I would just say that out loud, is that most of the demand comes from the buyers themselves, not because the magic program was created or went away. Quickly on the supply side, so to try and combat some of those market rate realities, some communities are looking at working on supply, and there's 2 strategies to share with you today. The first one is the Community Land Trust. So this model has grown in popularity across the nation. It was new years ago and scary for lenders. What this does is it separates ownership of the land from the house, from the improvements on top. So the buyer is only really buying the house, not the land. They have a lease, so they have rights to the land, but they don't own the land. The land trust does. And across the nation, those are typically nonprofits. And so the nonprofit owns the land, leases the land to the home buyer for 99 years for a minimal monthly lease rate, but it takes the cost of the land out of the home purchase for the buyer, so they're sold below market value. And that's how you create permanent or long-term affordability. Because when that buyer of the improvements goes to sell their house sometime in the future, then they can only sell it based on a formula. So they have restricted appreciation. They would get all of the money they've paid in their mortgage back 100%, but whatever's gone up because the market has gone up, they're only going to get some of that. And there's different formulas. Some are tied to an index. Some are like straight 2% increase annually. Some are tied to appraised value and a percentage of a new appraisal. So, you can get 25% of your appreciation. There's lots of ways to do that program. But essentially, it reduces the future sales price so that the next buyer can also benefit. So your initial investment in offsetting the price of the home can be shared by future buyers. Down payment assistance is great, but that house is not forever affordable. When they sell the house, you're getting paid back, but that house could be sold for whatever price to whomever, right? It could be an investor or whoever buying it. So it's kind of a one-time benefit. Land trust restricts how much you can sell it for and who can buy it. So also, once again, first-time home buyers, median income limits, however you want to define that. And then the other one to share with you is a deed restriction program that Vail, Colorado has been doing for quite some time. They call it Vail and Deed. I've given you the website because they can explain it much better than I can. But it's a deed restriction on the land. And so the owner owns the land and they own the property, and it could work for condos or, you know, all sorts of properties. But in exchange for a financial benefit, the deed restriction restricts who can live in that unit. And they restrict it based on employment. So you have to work in the city of Vail. And you can rent to somebody who works in the city of Vail, or that could be owner occupied. It does not set a price limit. It just says the occupant has to be a Vail resident. And so what they're trying to do essentially is to create a secondary market, right? Here's your market, and then these units are going to be priced lower because the only people who can buy them have to live or work in Vail. And so I've given you their snapshot. They've done 174 units, but the average cost per unit is $70,478. They've spent $12 million on this program. Their goal is to have 1,000 units in the Vail and Deed program by 2027. But they have money to throw at it, and they are throwing money at this problem. So I would say too, for land trust, the cost per unit is higher too, because you're really buying that unit forever, right? It can't just be $15,000 or $20,000. If someone's going to restrict the equity they're going to get in the future, it needs to be a pretty significant initial benefit. Last thing I want to talk to you about, second to last thing, is rentals. So your workforce also needs to rent, right? Not everyone's going to buy a house. Not everyone's ever going to be ready to or want to or financially be able to. And so I just want to share with you one of the strategies we're implementing at Housing Solutions is we're converting motels to rental units. So part of me is like, this is terrible because we're converting rental unit or, you know, home ownership units into VRBOs, which is commercial. And now we're taking commercial and converting it to residential. You've got all your things, but you've got things going on. So this opportunity came about because of COVID. There, of course, were federal funds that came to the state to invest in housing. It's specifically for households experiencing homelessness. That's the money piece of it. And so we are obligated to serve households experiencing homelessness for 5 years. That's the compliance period. But our goal after that would be to transition to permanent housing for low, moderate income households to be able to rent and live there with dignity and respect. We bought a motel. It's the Travelodge on East Route 66 in Flagstaff. It's about 47 years old. It is a fun project. I'm happy to talk to you offline about all the things. We're hopefully going to be done with construction in, depending on electrical panels, sometime this year. And then we'll be leasing it up. So it's 44 studio apartments that we're going to get out of that. And then we're doing it again in Cottonwood. So the Verde Valley Inn is 32 units. We'll start construction. It's weird to say this month because it's August now, but this month. And then we'll do the same thing where there's a 5-year compliance period to serve households experiencing homelessness, and then we'll convert to permanent housing for low and moderate income households. So 76 units in the next year coming on board with rental units. So just something to think about with adaptive reuse. We also have some underutilized commercial space in Flagstaff below our student housing complexes. It's been vacant for years. My argument is let's make that, housing, affordable workforce. I don't care how you define it. It's not going to block anyone's view shed. It's underutilized right now. So where do we have spaces that we can convert into decent, safe, affordable housing that are the low-hanging fruit? And the last thing is that $7 million bond. So the voters approved it in the fall of 2022. I will tell you it was not an easy go. We tried a bond in 2018. It failed barely for housing. The council did not put it on in 2020 because COVID hit right then, so they didn't want to ask the voters for any tax increases. And then we got it back on in 2022, and by then the problem had continued to get worse, and so there was overwhelming community support for this. But the local money has three distinct benefits. One is the local control. So as I talk about the down payment assistance program serving households up to 125% area median income, that's because it's local money and we can define what the need is. We can leverage local funds with state and private sector funding, whether it's financing or grants, to fill gaps or provide first money in. Nobody ever wants to be the first money in, so it's a really nice benefit. And we can hopefully bring employers to the table for employer-assisted housing, because now we've got $3 million to put for down payment assistance, and that might leverage folks to join in that haven't in the past. And then when it is a loan, so it's a revolving loan fund or it's a loan to developers, then it can revolve and be reused again in the future. So that one-time investment can be replicated or have ongoing benefit. So looking forward to seeing this really start to make a difference in our community up in Flag. And with that, I will be quiet unless you have questions for me.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So Northern Arizona Housing Solutions, I see that you have a dominant presence in Flagstaff, but for other communities, you had mentioned the 3 counties that you're actively in. What is your availability and resources for community outreach? And specifically, I would say a couple different segments. Number one, human resources, employers to establish some type of fund for matching and being able to educate and promote the capacity for that. And number two, for compliance, I have to give you a little bit of an explanation on this. I've been a mortgage banker for 26 years, and I have witnessed different market conditions. In most of these market conditions, the challenges that we are seeing with what is being conveyed to the borrowers about cash is king on the offer, a lot of that has to do with compliance. And I see a lot of compliance that is not being taken into consideration in the private sector. So what resources do you have to promote more education to realtors and builders about the importance of compliance, making sure that housing is fair?
I would say we have limited capacity. So we are growing, which is super exciting. I feel like we can't grow fast enough to keep up with everything we've got going on, but you can't say no to 76 units of housing, right? And the board has kind of embraced that. So we've been expanding in the number of employees we have. We've expanded to own property in Cottonwood. Like, that was never a thing until a year ago. We'll have staffing in Cottonwood associated with that project, and then housing counselors have expanded. We've doubled to be more present in Sedona and Cottonwood at that site when it's done with construction. I think the outreach and the marketing and the why you should for employers to come on board or partners or whatever, why should realtors or lenders participate in down payment assistance programs? You know, it adds another layer, it adds more partners, it adds complexity. We're going to look at the first mortgage financing to make sure the housing ratio is 35% or lower. Now someone's looking over their, it's all the things, right? Well, the reason you do it is because now you have a benefit to your borrowers who came in and couldn't qualify, and now they can get assistance. And so having that conversation with folks and getting 1 or 2 wins that then multiply. I did it again. Multiply into successes. Like, when you can get the mortgage lender who understands the program and gets 2 or 3 borrowers to use it, now that's their thing, and they want to go tell everybody about it. So I think there's some capacity there. On the compliance side, I don't think we have much capacity, quite frankly, in how we're going to get builders or lenders or folks to meet whatever federal guidelines or lending guidelines that they're supposed to meet. Like, we don't have a lot of
Education material available for that?
We do have education material, but I can't, like, we don't have the teeth, right? Or, to make sure people are doing what they said they're going to do. Like, I think about even, in Flagstaff where like builders agree to have a certain percent affordable, right, in a rental development. Like they got maybe reduced parking or they got reduced resource protection and they're going to have 10% affordable under 80% area median income. The City of Flagstaff housing section is making sure that is actually happening, not us. Like we don't have any, they don't have to tell us anything. Like that developer didn't have the agreement with us, they had it with the city. And so the city is the monitoring department for that agreement, not us.
Okay.
Yeah. Although I do have developers who've agreed to do that work with the city, then call us to ask us how they would do it. How do you fill out a tenant income certification? How do you do this work? Because the city's referred them to us for technical assistance. So we do provide that technical assistance. We're just not the compliance people, I would say. So we can do that training and information, but we're not going to get them if they've screwed up because we don't have any teeth.
What type of organization are you? Are you a 501c3 or?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're a 501c3. That was the easiest question I've had all day. Thank you.
Who are your counterparts with the municipalities that you work with? Is there a position in each municipality that is dedicated to affordable and workforce housing? Is it educate us on who you work with
Within the cities?
within the cities?
So Flagstaff's been around the longest. They have the largest housing section within their city. It's not a department, it's a section. I want to say they've got 6 or 7 employees in that section. They also have a housing authority that they manage. So we play with those guys all the time. The director, assistant director, CDBG compliance folks, they just came out and monitored us for a grant. So we connect with them regularly. For Cottonwood and Sedona, there's a shared housing manager position. And so we work with her and her one staff person, she just got a new staff person, on reporting and compliance and outreach for Cottonwood and Sedona because it's one person for both cities.
So they have dedicated people.
They do, yeah. Coconino County doesn't. So for their employer-assisted housing program, they have an outreach, like they do Meals on Wheels and the fiduciary and rental assistance, but it's not a housing section. So for their employer assisted housing program, we actually worked with the sheriff's department because it was for sheriff personnel and their HR director to get that program designed and implemented and go to the Board of Supervisors for approval. So that's the one where there's not a housing person to work with. It's more internal department heads and then HR.
Okay. And then finally, we talked about how your organization is funded. So if we recommended to the city council and they decided to partner with your organization, what would that look like?
It'd be a conversation, I think, to try and understand what we would be asked to do. What is the need from your perspective? Is it, coming down and doing housing counseling to pre-purchase housing counseling, first-time homebuyers? Is it more than that? Is it outreach and marketing for a program? Is it loan administration? Is it eligibility determination? All of those things you may or may not want or need. And so depending on what the ask is out of menu options, or there might be something I didn't even think of, we'd have to say, yes, we can do it, or no, we can't, and then here's how much it would cost. We have that capacity, or we'd have to build it, or what? How can I meet that obligation if we said yes to it? And then our board would have to approve that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I just one question. Typically, can you tell me a percentage of what you charge to do this for this municipalities? I mean, just a rough estimate.
Yeah, it depends on the fee structure. So we have a couple different ones. With some of our longer term partners, we do it as a per closing fee. So every loan we close will get paid an administration fee. But that's because we've been doing it for so long, we already have the built-in capacity. When we expanded to Sedona and Cottonwood, we didn't have that capacity, like a fee for closing, like I would never be able to hire someone to do that work. So they funded us at a flat level to do the housing counseling and administration for 2 years, so that way we can hire someone. So it wasn't connected to the number of loans we closed or anything like that. It was just what I needed to calculate to hire someone. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Devonna, right?
Devonna, yep.
Okay. One question I had for you in the realm of, it sounded like you were talking about inclusionary zoning earlier with the city of Flagstaff. Is that
No.
right?
I will
Oh, okay.
clearly say no, because that's not
Okay.
allowed.
I just was wondering if there is, well, I know mandatory is not allowed, but are there
voluntary.
Are there voluntary inclusionary zonings that you're seeing to be successful with the communities that you're serving?
So I think, so Sedona has a program and Flagstaff has the IPA, Incentive Policy for Affordable Housing. You can probably find that if you Google City of Flagstaff, Incentive Policy for Affordable Housing. I know it's IPA. I think there's limited impact of those. One, they're voluntary, right? The second one is I know the City of Flagstaff's been scheduled to revise their IPA for a couple of years now, and it has not been revised. So I know that there's changes that probably could and should be made. It's gotten woven into a bigger policy discussion about the zoning code revision. So I don't have a timeline on when that will get redone, but we're watching it.
And then also, can you speak a little bit more about your revenue? I know certainly you're funded by quite a bit with these contracts with municipalities, but what are your other funding sources? Can you give us a general breakdown of what comes from grants and so forth?
We are complicated, which is lovely and fun. So I would say for the housing counseling and down payment assistance program, I didn't mention, and I should have, that we are a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. I should say this because it is a lot of work to be a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, and we just went through our audit and passed. So I'm super excited about this. We are good for another 3 years. So we get some funding from HUD for housing counseling services. We do not get it directly. We get it through an intermediary pass-through, and that amount changes each year depending on everything. So we do have that funding source. We get money from, sometimes some of those CRA bank partners will fund us for housing counseling. So we have ongoing funding relationships with like 4 or 5 of them who will give us money for operating or housing counseling specifically or a special project. We have those agreements with cities and counties and municipalities, which is great. I would say none of that funds all of us. So then we play. We are a qualified charitable organization for the Arizona Charitable Tax Credit. So we get a lot of donations from individuals because then they'll turn around and get that dollar for dollar tax credit from the state. So that's fundraising importance for us. We also have done, so we've worked to diversify income because when you're waiting on Congress to pass a budget so that HUD can fund you, you're screwed, like quite honestly. So there's been years where we haven't gotten our contract for 6 months, but you still have to pay employees and all of that fun. So we've also worked to create earned income. So if we've done our work correctly, we own scattered site rental properties that are benefiting low and moderate income households. But if our mortgage costs are low enough and our pro forma is correct, those generate income for us, and it's unrestricted income. When we do development, so when we create a 44-unit studio apartment complex out of a hotel or in Cottonwood, there's a developer fee associated with that. So that helps fund overhead and ongoing operating expenses. So we're a developer, we're a CHODO, a community housing development organization. So we work on government and grant financing to create rental units that then create ongoing impact to the community because it's affordable housing, but then hopefully it cash flows, and then we get the developer fee as well. So There's a million little grants we apply for, everyone from the Diamondbacks to the Arizona Public Service. So it's a mishmash of everything. We get United Way funding for our transitional housing program serving domestic violence survivors. So I can't tell you percentages of all of those, but it's a lot of different funding sources to make the pie whole.
Roughly what percentage is from government assistance and municipal contracts?
Because most of our development funding comes from government contracts, I'd say quite a lot. I'd say probably 50 or 60%. And then the rest would either be earned income or private sector foundations and individual donors.
Thank you.
Sorry, if I could have just said that, that would have been easier.
It's good. No, it's good to learn.
Oversharing, I apologize.
Mike, may I ask one more question? So do you have any organization there that would just strictly buy down the percentage rate? Because I'm assuming you have a partnership with some mortgage companies that understand what you do.
So when we put down payment assistance or closing cost assistance at a loan, we rely on the loan officer to tell us is it better for principal reduction? Is it better to do a rate buy down? So they're looking at different choices to see how that money can go farthest. And it depends, right? Is the rate buy down expensive or not expensive in this market? So we're seeing a lot more rate buy downs right now. So we don't limit how that could be used by the loan officer.
Well, you've been in business long enough to have a failure rate. Do you know what that is? And if you do have a failure, does it just take the regular course of action where the bank would foreclose on the house and they would be evicted and then it would go back on the market? Is that pretty much the way it handles?
Yeah, so our foreclosure rate is just under 2% in those 400 or so loans. We haven't had one in a really long time.
great.
I mean, it was during the foreclosure crisis that the vast majority of them happened. Yes, so it would be sold at auction on the courthouse steps, depending on what the auction price is. I've learned this the hard way, that you then have to file with the court to get paid off for a second. That doesn't just happen in Arizona, but you can work through to get repaid as long as the sales price at auction was enough to cover the first mortgage, legal fees, and then your second mortgage. So we were actually whole in the one where it was our money. I think the city has mostly been whole in going after theirs as well, but there might have been one or two that they were upside down and didn't get repaid.
So can they write that off as a loss?
I don't know how the city works with loss. I don't know. That would be an internal accounting problem for the city.
Okay, thank you.
Process for the city, not problem. Yeah.
You talked about these motels converting to apartments and land trust. Does your organization ever act as the trustee of a land trust, or?
That's a good question. So not right now. So how it works in Flagstaff is the city of Flagstaff has created their own land trust program. In other areas, it's typically a nonprofit running it, but Flagstaff wanted to move forward and we didn't have the capacity like a decade ago, so they did it themselves. So the city is the land trust. They contract with us to do the eligibility determination and to administer. Oftentimes people buying a land trust property still get down payment assistance or need it because you can't get 100% financing. And so we do that work for them. So we're doing the eligibility determination, we're doing outreach and marketing, we're doing housing counseling, and then leveraging or layering any down payment assistance for those programs. And so they've expanded it to be the Flagstaff Affordable Housing Program, FOP, I guess that would be, because it also includes deed restricted properties, not just land trust. Because if you have a condo, there's no land to land trust. So they also do some deed restrictions.
Got it.
Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you very much. It's
Yeah.
been very
Hopefully that's what you
informative
wanted.
and educational.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you guys. Have fun working on housing. I'm sure you'll solve it.
Right.
Or at least, that's the thing, right? It's always a problem, but if we can move the needle or make a difference, it really, I mean, so in Flagstaff, it's like 2 degrees of separation. Like, I can't tell you how many people I know that I find in a different world who've gotten down payment assistance from us. Like, it's like, you know, you bought your house when you worked for, you know, DNA People's Legal Services, and now you're a legal counsel over here. Like, it's just, it is such a huge impact over time to see people stay in your community and be part of, you know, like they're the Little League coach, or they're, you know, running Girl Scouts, or you go to city council meetings and you see people you've helped buy a house. That's pretty exciting. And so I just, you know, especially in small towns, I encourage you guys to think about that, because it ripples when people can stay in and have decent housing.
Sorry, now you made me think of something else. So,
Oh, perfect.
So your organization certainly spends, it sounds like a majority of the time on getting through that barrier of the down payment and getting to homeownership. But isn't the gorilla in the room the monthly cost of the home as these home prices have
It's
gone
not.
up? I mean,
No, so a little bit, yeah. But I mean, rent in Flagstaff's like $2,400 a month for a 2-bedroom. That's a pretty nice mortgage payment. I mean, even at 7%, it was better at 3%, don't get me wrong. But I mean, what we're finding is that people are paying a lot of money for housing in rentals. And it's small units, it's not theirs, right? So their unit could be sold, or it could be change ownership, or you can't paint the walls, you can't have a puppy, like all of the things. And so that monthly payment typically isn't the barrier. It's the fact that you need 3%, 3.5% down, your closing costs are high. How do you come up with $40,000 or $50,000 to make the transaction work? And even if you had your $25,000, that's not enough. So can we bring more money to the table to now make your monthly payment 35% of your gross monthly income or less? So when I think about what people are paying for rent in Flagstaff, like, it's more than my mortgage payment. And I have a great house. I just happened to buy at the right time. And how unfortunate is it that that's what we're telling people these days is, I'm sorry you couldn't buy 5, 6, 7 years ago. Sucks for you. Like, so it just feels like when you're ready to buy, if you can make it work, now you have stable housing. Now you know your payment isn't going to change dramatically when, you know, your lease renews next year. Like, there's a lot of stability that comes with homeownership that I think people value.
okay. All right. Thank you.
That's my, what's it called? Soapbox. So, yeah, you got it.
All right, on to item 3D, and I missed the last meeting, so
Awesome.
those that were here, you want to, or Chelsea, can you guide us here?
Let me get there. Lots to think about. Let's see, we approved, here we are. Okay, so we had circulated some questions. So at the last meeting, we talked about needing to do action, but also needing to collect data from our local stakeholders. And we circulated some survey questions that we had comments on at the last meeting. And we just wanted to quickly go through those. And I'm going to ask our awesome IT team to click on the link in this slide and kind of scroll through the questions. But I do know that you all have a hard copy there of the survey questions. So this is for the stakeholder organization. And I don't know, IT team, if there's any way to make that bigger. That is microscopic and I cannot read it. Wonderful, thank you. You guys are the best. Okay, so for stakeholder organizations, and we'll look at the list of organizations that we've been compiling. It's obviously a living document, but for right now, for our organization partners or stakeholders, we're going to ask the following questions. You know, what's your name? What's your position in the organization? The name of your organization, contact information, and then starting in question 6, you know, how much demand does your organization have for workforce housing? We want to know and quantify the number of livable units from our stakeholder organizations. How much of the demand would you need for recruitment versus the next question, retention? So we're looking for our stakeholders to quantify for us how many units and for how long, because those are two different things, as Devana mentioned. You know, one might be a rental and one might be actual homeowner permanent ownership. And then question number 9, you know, we're letting them know that our ultimate goal is to provide a path to home ownership, but we'd like to know if what their opportunity or what their desire is for their organization. Is it just to partner with rental? Is it just ownership? Or are they looking to partner with us for both? Because we're going to need different commitment levels on each of those avenues. And then question number 10 for our stakeholder partner organizations. Apart from physical units, other strategies is financial assistance programs. Are they going to partner with us can they contribute financially? I mean, we really need to know if they're going to put their money where their mouth is, kind of, so to speak. So we're asking that question. And then participating in leadership of a new entity formed to steward workforce housing initiatives. So kind of like Devana's organization, we've talked together before about the fact that this is not a City of Prescott problem. This is a global issue, quite frankly, but we need to tackle it with our regional partners. So the idea is that this won't necessarily be a new department of the City of Prescott. It might look like what Devana mentioned, the Community Land Trust, that is formulated by other stakeholders and partners. So we want to know our stakeholder organizations' desire to engage in a new entity that would be formed. And then their willingness to adopt an employee housing program for their specific employees. You know, we're going to have to tackle it as a regional issue, maybe on the supply side, but when it comes to their individual organization and helping with down payment assistance, helping it various other ways like that, it may look like them creating a program that maybe is templated through a new organization or by the leadership of the city, but they will need to administer that, or they may need to. So we're just trying to get a baseline here of our stakeholder organizations and their willingness to work with us on this. And then the last one, you know, who are the decision makers in your organization? We want to know who our contacts are at each of these entities. So IT team, if you would go back to the presentation, we're going to quickly go over the employee survey, because we're doing a two-pronged approach. We want our stakeholder organizations to answer a survey, and then we have a survey with questions for their employees. So go ahead and click the Start Now, and let's zoom in on that one. Oh, and it does look a little bit different. That's way easier to read. Okay, so again, name, contact information. We want to know their title, what organization they're a part of, if they're in need of housing, and then the number of bedrooms they might need, numbers of bathrooms, square footage. Again, this is targeting the people who need the homes right now. What kind of size are they needing? What do they need their accommodations to look like? Would you want to lease or own? What would be your preference? You know, sometimes when you ask someone, well, would you like to own or lease? They'd say, well, I can only lease right now. Well, what would be your preference? So how many months would you need? Are you looking for permanent housing? Are you looking for temporary housing? And then what types of products? This is another thing that we talked about before, kind of trying to figure out what projects, as we look at land that might be available and our partners that we'll engage with to build projects if necessary, you know, what should we start with? So this is a good way of kind of getting some data on that. Maximum length of commute. You know, Arnold brought this up as a question with Devana. We want to know where are you commuting from, and what's the max amount you would be willing to commute? Because ultimately, we'd love to build everything in Prescott, but we know we're kind of land poor right now, and we don't know what we have available. So we want to know from these folks that need the homes, how long are you willing to commute? Do you have pets? That was another good one that would be important to know. And then what is your family's household's net income? Because that also plays a part in availability. And then monthly payment, what do you consider to be affordable? And then 18, I don't know why we have question there. I'm sure it's a placeholder. And then do you have money for a down payment? So, and we could expand these surveys. Again, you have hard copy forms in front of you that are easier to read. But the idea is that we finalize this survey and kind of springboarding off of what Devana mentioned, the survey that was done a few years back for their organization. This is kind of for Prescott and our stakeholders. As we look at focusing on specific workforce housing groups, we're going to send these to our specific stakeholders to get data on those. Thank you, IT. That's perfect. So we have a stakeholder list, but before we go into reading the names and think about disseminating this survey, I'd like to know any feedback, anything we missed you feel that needs to be removed. And Arnold, I'm going to have Mike pass you the microphone again because you're uber quiet. So go ahead.
Thank you for your eloquence, your efficiency, and most importantly, keeping an eye on me on that microphone. Specific, I think, to help engage some of the stakeholders, a good question to ask up front on this survey is their willingness to enable employees to participate in housing education workshops for eligibility. Many of these working families won't have or will struggle to find the time to do this kind of off the clock. So if we could get our finger in the pulse as to how many employers are willing to allocate maybe half of their education to be or a quarter of their education to be done on the clock while they're working, I think would be a relevant consideration to this survey.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, I have a couple of suggestions on the employee survey. It seems to me on the number 6, are you in need of housing? If they're not in need of housing, do we really want to collect that data, or is it just a waste for us to process?
And that was on the employee. Are you in need of housing?
Yes.
So the idea is that we want to collect data from all employees in the organization, and recognizing that some of them may have their own home. You know, we don't know. I'd like to. I mean, we can. I guess I'd leave that up to you guys if you think that would be worthy, but it might be good information for if the employer hasn't done a survey for their employees to know, hey, this is the feedback we got from your organization. You actually have less employees in need of housing than you originally thought.
Okay. And then on that, could we consider breaking that down to say, I don't have housing or I'm struggling to find housing?
Yeah.
Because there could be two different camps there. And then Devana inspired a question I thought maybe we should ask, have they considered leaving the community because of affordability? I think that would be important for employers and for us to know.
Great, thank you.
And then number 16, should we clarify what is your family's monthly net income, since we're comparing to their monthly payment?
Great. And that was question number
16.
16, monthly. Thank you.
And then on the organization survey, I'm just wondering if number 11, would your organization participate in the leadership of a newly formed entity? Do we want to just say, are you open to participating instead of making it a direct invitation? We don't
Okay.
really know what that looks like yet, right?
Sure, we don't.
Okay.
Wonderful feedback, thank you. Any other feedback on the surveys?
I think another on that.
Microphone, sir.
Let me get my glasses on. All right. On that 19, it says, do you have money for a down payment?
Okay,
Maybe it could be worded rather than, do you have money? Have you saved money towards it? How much is it? Because then you kind of figure out how much they have, because that program, Devon,
Devana.
yeah, said it's matching, so they'd have to have something, and you get an idea if people had put money away at this point, but just not enough to
Great.
qualify.
Okay. Good feedback. Thank you, sir. Any other feedback on surveys? I know we're running short on time, so I'll just kind of breeze through. We will plan on, if you think of anything else, Amber and I will kind of get this refined over the next 2 weeks, and we'll plan on sending it out mid-month. Please send us any other feedback that you have before that time. Okay, so let's move into where we think we should. Yes, Chairman?
I think you're going to where my question
Okay,
is.
great.
Go ahead.
So who's going to receive this? The idea is we've compiled a stakeholder list. Chairman Fan had provided some organizations that kind of expanded it, and that's perfect. So this is our initial stakeholder list. Again, we're kind of focusing on our fire, police, nurses, teachers kind of workforce initially. And this is our list that we've put together. We're working on gathering poignant contacts for each of those organizations, and the idea is to send these to them for them to fill out the survey for the organization, and then them to disseminate the employee survey to their employees. So let me know if you have any additions.
Yeah, here's my concern. We've targeted public and quasi-public organizations here, but there are. I think we should probably coordinate with Sherry at the Chamber of Commerce and at least hit some of the larger private employees and get that feedback also, especially when it comes to the service industry. I think that's where we've got probably the biggest problem or the biggest need.
Hospitality, is that what you said?
I'm sorry?
What industry?
The service industry.
Okay, yeah.
And so I think working with the chamber and getting some data from that portion of our community would be very useful.
Okay. Yeah, our initial thought was sending it out to this group first, but the way we've created the surveys is we're capturing organization information on the surveys, so we'll know where the information's coming from and can, separate if we need to by category of workforce. So, yeah, I can definitely coordinate with Sherry on that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Wonderful.
And Sandy contractors?
Absolutely. Thank you. Chairman.
Chelsea, I have
Yeah,
a question on that.
Arnold.
Are we looking to add more fire departments within our surrounding areas to this? Is that something that we're actively looking to do? Because that's a demographic that we're targeting.
Well, I think we're focused on regional areas. So we have CAFMA on there. They service a lot of Yavapai County and Prescott Valley, other places, and then Prescott PD. Was there another one that you were thinking to add?
My employer, Williamson Valley Baghdad,
Okay.
they're losing a lot of people to the Phoenix department's kind of the same thing. So
Gotcha.
that's why I was asking, is there a way to maybe add them as a consideration on this stakeholder?
I don't see a problem with that. I mean, they're, it's a little expanded, but it's still in the region. So
Sure.
Okay. Baghdad.
Yeah, they Williamson Valley, Baghdad, Mayor, Crown King, and Southern Yavapai. I know it's a mouthful.
I might need to get that from you later. Okay.
Mike, could I make a mention too? The hospitality we were talking about with the Hotel Motel Association, they probably have some stats on that also up here, because we have a few motel management companies up here. I think we only have 2. That'd be easy, but a lot of employees. And then, of course, there's some large restaurant owners too that have several restaurants, and I think there's 3.
Yeah.
That's why I was saying probably Sherry was the one to say, okay, because she's probably got that data on on hospitality and restaurants and
But I
service
can
industry.
ask her if the big ones are all on her contact list and go from there and see if we need to backfill.
Yeah, good point.
Wonderful. Okay. So that is, any other questions about the survey or who it gets sent to? Okay, let's move on here. We wanted to review, staff updates. Okay, so I'd like to take the opportunity at this point to introduce Tammy DeWitt, our community planner. She is coordinating, she's the staff liaison for the General Plan Committee, and they are holding the first general plan focused housing, I'm sorry, I've got housing on the brain. The first open house for the general plan. So she's going to pass out some flyers for you. It's at the end of this month. And I'm going to give the mic over to Tammy when she's done to take us through the workforce housing components that she's asking for public input on, specifically at this open house.
Okay. Good afternoon, morning still. Yes, morning. Mid-morning, late morning. I don't know. Okay. I know it's Wednesday. That's good enough. Okay. Thank you for having me today. We are planning our first open house for the general plan update. It's the general plan and historic preservation master plan update because they have to do public outreach. It's August 30th at the Rowley Event Center in the main auditorium area. We do have a survey out, so we do have a website for the general plan update. It's planprescott.com. We do have a survey on there. We do have 4 housing questions on there, and some other questions. We're asking people: do you live in Prescott? How long have you lived here? Or do you work in Prescott and commute in? That was a big question, which we are seeing a lot of people. We've had it up since February. We've had 300 and I think it was 20 responses so far. We're hoping after the open house we'll have hopefully a bigger surge to kind of close that survey. And then we can open up other surveys. But one of the things that we have for the open house is we are asking about workforce housing. What type of housing would you like to see more of? So we have and then they have them back here, the boards that we're going to have. So one question is, what type of housing would you like to see more of? Townhomes, apartments, or the ability for accessory dwelling units to be rented as long-term rentals, because right now they can only be used as overflow housing or for short-term rentals. Or expand the areas of manufactured housing. And we have the map of Prescott right now, the areas that allow for manufactured housing. So we could kind of see if there are other areas that people may want to see to allow for manufactured housing, because that's another product. And then we have another space there just for other ideas or products that they'd like to see. We are expanding our vision because it is quality of life that we're trying to preserve in Prescott. And one of the things we are adding is a variety of housing options. So we're asking for more ideas from the public of what they consider quality of life. Housing is a huge issue. I remember back in 2007 and 2008, I was part of the Verde Valley Housing Task Force. Until the market crashed. And then what was the first department to go from all the cities to towns? The housing department. So I'm really excited to see this committee and see what comes out of it. We were looking at becoming a housing, we were working with the state in becoming a housing authority in the Verde Valley, which trying to get all the teams to play together is very interesting. Be interesting to see how it goes on the side of the mountain. The Verde Valley's always had a lot of collaboration through the years. And this side, it would be interesting to see how we get them to play together. So super excited to see what comes out of this. But if you have an idea, go to Plan Prescott, check out our survey. We do have some housing questions and then others that relate to housing too. So
Thank you.
that was my spiel.
Awesome. Thank you, Tammy. So please do encourage the people in your circles to come to the open house on the 30th, and definitely check out the boards behind you before you leave today, and let Tammy know if you all have any questions. And real quick, we went over and I probably should have moved this slide up earlier, but we went over the organization stakeholder list. This is potential partner list. So we've had a lot of developers, a lot of builders, a lot of groups reach out to us. Just so you all know, it came up at the last meeting. I think, Randy, you brought it up that, hey, we should have some builders, we should have some developers come and talk to us about the products that they can build. We have been compiling this list of partners, and this doesn't include other partners that might be in the room. So if there is will from the committee, take a look at the list. Let me know if there's a specific group of people that you want to present, if there's specific questions that you want to know. And I know the Sheridan group is in the room. DJ's back there. But anyhow, we have and are continuing to populate this data, this information, these contacts in the community. So wanted to let you know that that's there. And
Chelsea, if you would, go ahead and add Clayton Homes
Clayton.
to that, and MHIA, Manufactured Housing Industry of Arizona. And I can have them do presentations as the future comes.
Thank you. Okay, I know we're running a little bit long, so I'm going to move on. And I forgot to let Matt know that we do typically talk about the next agenda. I know this next agenda discussion isn't agendized. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, great. I'm learning too, y'all. Okay, so next agenda. So Mike mentioned that we meet usually the week after the meeting to come up with next agenda items. And I do have a list, but I know Nicole had some ideas. I wasn't sure if you wanted to share those now or you want to email them later, however you want to do that.
I guess I would love to hear your list.
Oh,
I don't want to
sure.
repeat what you
Sure. No, that's fine.
Chicken.
So again, just city-owned land. We can identify those parcels to specific builders and ask them to speak about a product that might work for the parcels that we know that we have available right now. We can talk about the incentive package that I have Mike McGinnis in Community Development. He's our CDBG coordinator, but he's helping come up with incentive package options that work for other places. So we're working on that. Our finance department to talk about development impact fees that Randy brought up last meeting. George and his planning team can speak to flexibility in zoning and more ADUs. We touched on that last time as well. Cody Ann Yarns or other realtors talk about kind of what you're looking for in reference to land and any other adaptive reuse potential projects, as Devana mentioned. And then emailing a potential to discuss if we want to email our partner list and ask and how we want to ask them to partner on affordable housing projects and kind of letting them know that we want to hear from them and their products and how we would roll that out. And then, of course, Matt mentioned conflict of interest training, open records and public records training. We'll weave those in as we go. And then maybe what I jotted down after Devana spoke, what does partnership with Housing Solutions look like in the future? So I know I rattled all those off really fast, but anybody have anything else? Yes, sir, Randy.
Sorry, but can't quite hold this back. I'm a task-orientated kind of guy. I think you guys all figured that out. And when I joined this committee, the scope was huge. Mm-hmm. So our span of control is, I don't even know, it's way out here. This problem is huge. I'd like to suggest that we narrow our focus a little bit. Mm-hmm. As a private developer, when I look at a project, the first thing I look at, and I think you can agree, is do I have the funding to make this work? Will it work, and do I have the financial ability to make it work? I'd like to suggest to our committee that we focus on funding. In other words, as I read this book you gave us, there's a lot of avenues for us to generate revenue to put in a workforce housing fund. If we can focus on that and we can start to, create avenues to generate revenue, then we can get an idea how much revenue that we could potentially generate. And then that would allow us to look at our developers that are interested in working with us and being able to offer certain parts of that development. I met with George last week and this week as well, and I asked him about the school district deal and how much we actually contributed to that project. He's looking into that. I'm not sure if he's got it.
Yeah, I actually have that. I helped get that project to
good.
fruition, but a lot of the participation on the city side was through our internal work and then outsourced contracts. But the monetary value of those things came up to about $500,000.
Okay, so I met with the guys over in engineering, and they kind of told me the same thing. So my point is that it took money to make that work from this side of the aisle, the city side. So I feel sometimes that we're, the cart's ahead of the horse there a little bit, because we need to get an idea of what we can do financially to help our developers build the product that we want them to build or that they're willing to build for us. But we need to look at the avenues in which we can generate that revenue. And guys, there's a bunch. I've been reading about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff. So for next meeting, I'd like to get it on the agenda that we talk about these different revenue sources. I see sometimes the mayor sitting here in the building. We have a council member here. Some of this stuff the council is going to have to take up that I'd like to talk about and propose. But if we can look at different revenue sources that'll generate this funds, that'll set aside for workforce housing, then we got some real teeth. I think I heard her say that word teeth in her presentation. If we have the clout, because we have the financial ability to extend to our developers. Let me give you a quick example. I don't mean to ramble on, but when I met with the engineering guys, average house, 15 grand for a water meter. When you factor in the impact fees, sewer hookup fees, the water meter itself, blah, 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 blah. $15,000 is a lot of money. So if we can mitigate that for our developers, that's a $15,000 ticket they don't have to pay per household, or potential ticket. So that's what I'm talking about here, is that we can't just forgive those fees, according to George. Those fees have to be paid.
Yeah, state
But workforce
statute, not just
housing
George.
can generate that income, hold on to it, and then we can distribute it out to help our developers achieve the goal of affordable housing. If we don't do this, if we don't generate the revenue to help them, I, for the life of me, can't understand how a developer can come in this town and build something that'll ever be affordable. I build here. It's really expensive.
Yeah.
So that's my pitch for next meeting, and sorry I rambled on so long, but I think if we can narrow our scope a little bit so it's not so broad, we can really focus and we can get going down this road, and we can start seeing what we can actually get done, work with city council to get their buy-in on some of this, put it before the voters if we have to, whatever it takes, and really narrow the field here a little bit. And I think it'll be all easier for us to understand the scope of what we're trying to get done. And let me just say, once we do that, then we can broaden our horizons, because we have the teeth to say, okay, now we have this fund, and we can sort of predict how much this fund's going to generate. And so now we can start looking at product to come into our city to be built, because we know our abilities. Right now, we don't know. I don't think we have any ability financially, unless the city council helps us out with general fund.
Well, and if a private partner or other partner comes to us with a project, the 500,000 for the PUSD project wasn't out of a housing fund. It was kind of culled together out of various funds. So
Right.
There is definitely a will behind seeing these projects come to fruition. We just have to figure out, okay, how do we dangle the carrot to get the builders and the developers here?
There you go.
What does that carrot look like? And it might not look like, hey, we have $500,000 in this pot ready to take. It might be, we're looking for a partner to develop this specific project. This is what we can do as it relates to utilities, as it relates to infrastructure, et cetera.
That may be the whole goal of this board. We may create that carrot. That may be the only thing we do.
Okay.
But it's significant.
We'll grow carrots together.
All right,
Let's do it.
I'm done.
Thank you, Randy.
You're welcome.
Based on the presentation we heard today, and I know it was on last month's agenda, But I would ask that we put back on agenda a staff workforce housing position.
Okay.
That's point of contact, right?
Point of contact and who can pursue grants, do grant writing, pursue state
A
funding.
dedicated employee.
That's exactly.
I'm not saying that into the microphone.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
all I have.
And Arnold had his hand up. If you could pass him the microphone.
Thank you.
Sorry.
One of our partners, Sheridan Realty Group, could gather information. One of his clients is a large investor on a national level who funds workforce housing projects. So I'd like to request that we make that a future agenda item to grow our teeth, sharpen our teeth. And then he could start to work on putting together information for our group to evaluate.
Okay. I'll reach out to DJ and we'll see what we can come up with.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We are over time, so if anybody else have anything else? This meeting is adjourned.